Hello, my name is Rick Bogle. In 1999, I was protesting in front of the Oregon National Primate Research Center just outside of Portland in Hillsboro. The Oregon Primate Center is the sister facility of the Wisconsin Primate Center. Our protest had lasted about 4 days. While we were protesting, the spin doctors from the Oregon Primate Center talked to various people from the media, reporters, newscasters, and told them essentially that our claims about what was going on in the labs, about the suffering of the animals, was all made up, and there was just simply nothing to it at all, that our claims were absurd. Little did we know, neither me nor the Primate Center spin doctors, that there was somebody inside at that time working in the lab who was secretly videotaping and taking photographs and recording everything that was going on. His name was Rossell. About a year later, I was able to help Matt present the truth of what was going on in the Primate Center. The director of the Wisconsin Primate Center is named Joe Chemnitz. Dr. Chemnitz says that all of the primate centers operate in the same way. There's 8 large federally funded primate centers around the country. The Wisconsin Primate Center is one of those. I hope that you'll listen carefully to what Matt has to say. Matt came here in 2004 and presented to a number of people in town, talking about showing his videos and talking about what he'd learned that was going on inside the Primate Center from having worked there for 2 years. So I hope you'll pay very close attention to what he has to say. I think it gives us a good window into what's likely going on here in our own labs here in Madison. So thank you very much. Pay close attention.
Thank you. I want to thank Alliance for Animals and Lori and Stacy and Leslie for inviting me. And Leslie's putting me up, and she actually, because of her ironing my clothes today, I don't look like I just crawled out of a tent, because I've been camping for the last week, so it's probably the nicest I've looked in a long time. And I'm really excited that this conference is happening, and I really hope that there's someone or someone's out in the audience that are actually from the Primate Center, because this conversation really needs to be happening there. I mean, the topic of the ethics of primate research needs to be brought into the research community. The American Society of Primatology should be inviting us to have this discussion with them. And so that's why it's so important that this conference is happening here. And maybe if we keep up the pressure, I mean, this is a good start. I just found out next year that the American Society of Primatology is meeting in Portland, so we'll definitely revisit this question next year, and maybe at some point we'll actually be including this as a part of their conference. But until that happens, we'll have it as a counter-conference. But I think that one person who's notably absent from the discussion today is someone speaking on the scientific arguments against animal research. And that person that comes to mind to me is Dr. Ray Grieve. He and his wife have written several, or they're third now, they're on their third, very scholarly research. They've written 3 books on the topic of just the science, throw the ethics out the window. Let's just look and see if this animal research is really working. And the only reason he's not here today is because he speaks, he's done a lot of speaking to the choir and talking to the animal rights community, and he really wants to debate the scientists. And once again, he's been stood up, and the research community is not willing to step forward and defend their research, which I think should draw some questions in all of our minds as to if this research is really truly valuable to human health, why is it that they're not willing to come forward and defend it? Why is it that they are hiding behind locked lab doors? And it starts to make you wonder, even myself, with not a lot of scientific background, I've been questioning this a lot, especially since I did work at the Oregon Primate Center for 2 years. And I mean, what I saw there was breaking my heart every day in terms of the way that the animals are being treated and how their lives are completely devoid of everything that is natural to them. These are monkeys that mostly rhesus macaques. At the Oregon Primate Center at the time I was there, between 98 and 2000, there were 2,500 monkeys. It's basically a monkey farm. They're breeding monkeys for research and they're conducting basic research. And these monkeys who have evolved over the millennia to have very complex social relationships within their own communities, or they're called troops of monkeys, ranging in size from 25 to 50 to 100, depending on the species. These primates, non-human primates, have evolved to have these highly developed social structures, not dissimilar to human beings. And they live together, they fight off predators from their territories together, they feed together, they love one another, and in the research environment, they exist in slightly larger than 2 feet by 2 feet stainless steel cages with a dog toy. This dog toy is a result of all of the data that their own research that they're conducting is they're realizing that these primates are suffering. They're suffering emotionally. They have the same basic emotional needs as human beings do. They suffer in the same ways. The depression in a monkey it looks the same as it does in people. They suffer from boredom and loneliness, and they live their whole lives in fear. And all of this has been, data has been collected through their own research. It was undeniable, and back in 1986, the Animal Welfare Act was amended to include a provision for psychological well-being. And this sounds great, and the researchers love to talk about psychological well-being in the laboratories. And when I worked at the Oregon Primate Center, the first thing that I saw was what they call the junior high. It was a room in the south wing of what was called the Colony Building, and this room was basically where they took infants that were weaned. They're weaned at 6 months. They're basically stolen away from their mothers from the time-mated breeding colony because they want the female monkeys to get pregnant again. It's a monkey farm. They're just cranking out babies as quickly as they can. So here you have a room full of juvenile and infant rhesus monkeys, all showing signs of distress. And at the time, I was hired off the street. I didn't know anything about monkeys. I had never worked with primates. But I knew something was wrong with this picture. I mean, here there is a room full of little baby monkeys running back and forth on the wire, crying out, and what I later found out to be distress calls. And these same calls in the wild would instantly be responded to by their mothers. An infant wanders too far away from their mother and they cry out. Their mother would instantly scoop them up and comfort them, just as a human would to their child. Well, in these laboratories, their calls are unanswered and they cry out. And my office that I worked in was actually right next to this room, and it was just a constant. It was torturous just for me to sit there and listen to it, and I felt very powerless while I worked there, just feeling like there was nothing that I could do to alleviate their suffering. But I realized early on that there was something wrong with this situation, but I decided to stick it out and to try to make a change from within. And over time, I worked within the system. I worked myself very quickly into a position in the psychological well-being program, thinking that this program I was going to be able to help the monkeys and do something to make their lives a little bit better. And it was a very daunting task. It was me. I had one supervisor, but she really wasn't doing a lot of hands-on. So I was responsible for the psychological well-being of about 1,200 individually caged rhesus monkeys and a few other species, mainly rhesus. And I used all the tools that they gave me. Through over time to develop basically the behaviors that I saw. All these abnormal behaviors, including monkeys pulling out their hair, eating their feces, drinking their urine, abusing their children, circling and pacing, which is called stereotypy, and in its worst form, the behaviors of self-abusive monkeys, where they literally are biting and attacking themselves, doing serious damage to themselves. All these behaviors, I would say all of the monkeys individually caged are showing some type of abnormal behavior. And to remedy this, the industry afforded me some tools, like I had puzzle feeders. And these were devices that you'd hang on the cage that you'd put treats into, and the monkeys learned how to manipulate the treats out. It was supposed to occupy their mind, because here they are, this intelligent animal, just completely bored and frustrated, so we were trying to give them something to do. Monkeys that were pulling out their hair, we would give grooming boards, which is a metal device that you hang on the cage that has a bit of fleece attached to it, and they were supposed to pluck the fleece out instead of pulling out their hair. Or toys, or treats, or all these different things. And what I started realizing with these behavior cases was, number one, most of the monkeys that had behavior cases were never even brought into the behavior program, because stereotypies and stuff were just considered totally intractable within the industry. No one even knows how to attempt to deal with them, so they don't even try. And so we would only even try to deal with the most severe cases, and I realized that the program wasn't working. In fact, like, say, for example, the puzzle feeders. You would put treats into one of these puzzle feeders, and these intelligent monkeys, many of them had mastered them to the point where even before I left the room, they'd already emptied all the treats out. And so these treats, these puzzle feeders, are supposed to be filled 3 times a week. So basically, we're occupying their mind for about 3 or 4 minutes a week, and the rest of the time they're just sitting there bored. The grooming boards, they loved it. They loved the treats. They loved all these devices. Of course, it's something for them to do. But I noticed no correlation between these behavior interventions and their problems getting better. In fact, I would often notice sometimes if their behavior ever did get better, which it usually didn't, if it did, and I could even figure out why it got better, it had something more to do with maybe their research protocol had ended, or they were moved to a different room where they might have been under less stress, like there wasn't a monkey that they feared that they were right across from, or maybe they moved from a bottom cage to a top cage. And for a monkey, being high up is a lot safer place to be. They've evolved to flee up into trees if predators come around. So, in a laboratory setting, people, or the lab technicians like myself, are their predator, and the monkeys on the bottom were obviously feeling a lot more fearful because we towered over them, and at least on the top cages they could get a little bit further and climb away into the top of the cage. And so I would constantly talk to my supervisor about the fact that our program wasn't working, and she didn't deny it. I mean, she totally agreed with me. It was obvious. There was no denying it. But nothing ever changed. And I had weekly meetings with the head veterinarian, and he was full of excuses about why we couldn't do more, why we weren't doing more social housing. It all really boiled down to money. Why we couldn't even give them a piece of fruit every day. I mean, this is how stark the environment is in these research labs. Our enrichment program allowed the monkeys to have one little sliver of apple 3 times a week. And that was the first thing that would drop off of the program if people were running short on time. And one thing you need to know about these research labs is that they very much operate like any factory farm. They are an assembly line style of research. And for so many different reasons, I think the research is really invaluable to human health. On one hand, you've got people like myself who were hired off the street with no previous experience, actually doing the scientific research. You would like to believe that, or the researchers would like you to believe that it's these PhDs in lab coats with all this knowledge who are actually conducting experiments on research animals. Well, that's not at all the case. It's contracted out. I was part of the Division of Animal Resources. We were contracted by the primary investigators who got the grant money, and so we would do the science. We were injecting the animals with agents. We didn't know what was in the needle. We had no vested interest in the science itself. We were never taught the Animal Welfare Act or the provisions of the Animal Welfare Act, so we didn't realize we were breaking federal laws every day, just as a general course of the animal husbandry. They didn't want us to know that, but I found that out on my own because of my previous work as an animal abuse investigator. I knew the Animal Welfare Act existed, and I studied it on my own. And so, my critics argue that, oh, well, he's just an animal rights activist who went in there to spy on us, and everything he says is a lie. Well, in actuality, I was working very hard at advocating from within. It is true that I was an abuse investigator in my past, but unlike the other investigations that I did, I was vocally advocating. Usually in an investigation, you're a fly on the wall. You don't try to do anything to change, you're just observing. But I was actively trying to make a difference, seeing if someone from within could actually change the system, make it better, make the lives of the monkeys better. And I found out that the industry has no desire to change. It's really all about money. There's really, the ethical consideration has long ago been thrown out the window, if it ever was considered at all. And anything that you do to improve the quality of lives for these animals costs more money. And so there's a huge resistance to that. Plus, I think there's a psychological resistance to that because you've got researchers that have been entrenched in this research for 25 years, and some do-gooder comes along and says, well, you need to socially house your monkeys. They need to be with other monkeys. And then what if the data changes? Are these researchers willing to take a look at that and say, the data that we've been collecting for the last 25 years is invalid because these test subjects were so stressed out and in such unnatural conditions that, their physiology was changed and their cortisol levels were through the roof. And actually we've been collecting data on, psychologically abused animals that are completely, that the data is completely useless. So these researchers aren't willing to take a look at the ethics, and so this just goes on and on. And I started making anonymous complaints to the USDA, and she didn't take my word for it. She did her own investigation and her own inspections. And her name is Dr. Isis Johnson Brown. She was Oregon's USDA inspector. And one thing about the USDA is that she was responsible for the whole state of Oregon. So you have, the industry, the researchers will say, oh, well, we've got the USDA, we've got all these oversight, all these different levels of oversight. Well, she would visit this lab like once a year. So how much can someone really witness in, looking at 2,500 monkeys in a one-day visit? And besides that, her whole visit was so orchestrated. I could see the whole thing from behind the scenes. And there was a whole tidal wave of cleaning that happened just preceding the inspection. If they didn't already know she was coming, which they often did, because she would visit some other facility nearby, and that facility would call all the others and let them know. But even if it was a surprise visit, it was a very orchestrated tour where they would take the USDA inspector first to the place that was most in compliance while everyone was scrambling to clean everything up just in front of the tour. And so, not all USDA inspectors are good old boys, and she happened to really want to do her job and believed in the system and wanted to make it work. And she tried filing her complaint. She found out what I found to be true, and she found quickly that she wasn't being supported by her own supervisors. And in one instance, she was told by a supervisor that she was citing them too much. And we were talking about bare bones laws, and they told her, you should make your list of violations, then cut that list in half, then cut that list in half again before actually filing your report. And while I was still working there, she quit in frustration. She actually, because she was trying to do her job, she thought that it was very close that she was going to be fired anyway. She saw the handwriting on the wall and realized that she wasn't really making a difference from inside, and she quit. And so even if someone in the USDA wants to do their job, the system is not set up to work. And when we held our press conference with the help of In Defense of Animals, we held a press conference, she was sitting there right by my side, and that's exactly what she said at this press conference, was that the USDA is not protecting the animals in the labs, they're protecting the financial interests of the researchers. And I also want to say I'd much rather have a conversation. So if anyone has a question, feel free to interrupt. I don't mind that at all. Something I say sparks a question, feel free to ask. So while I was advocating from inside, I was also secretly documenting what I was witnessing. I was videotaping my failures. I had a lot of access to the animals that were having the most severe problems, and was able to capture some of that on video. And I was going to show you some of that during my talk, but since there's a documentary coming up later this afternoon called Nat'l, done by Rebecca Harrell, and that has a lot of footage in it, so I'm going to spare you for the moment seeing some of the footage. But when we went public, it created quite a stir. And it was really interesting to me because before I quit, I actually filed a complaint. I quit vocally. I didn't just slink away. I quit very vocally, and I circulated a petition amongst my coworkers, and 2/3 of my coworkers signed this petition that we gave to the IACUC, the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. And the petition that we signed was a scathing criticism of the whole system. I mean, basically what it said was, we as animal technicians in this totally dysfunctional environment are not afforded the time to care for the animals in the way that they deserve. And this is resulting in mistakes in research, it's resulting in USDA violations, and it's resulting in inadequate care for the animals. And what was funny about that is that I was basically a hero inside the lab. Before I went public, my coworkers supported me. We filed this petition. We were able to get the head veterinarian to be, well, he was really let go. They made it appear on paper that he had retired. But another person that was the operations manager, who was like his sidekick, ended up losing his job over it. And I was like, Dorothy when the house landed on the Wicked Witch. I mean, everyone was so pleased with me. They're willing, these technicians and researchers inside the labs are very vocal about discussing the ridiculous research amongst themselves. I mean, we were always having conversations at the break table about this or that totally preposterous study. But then as soon as I went public with it, all of a sudden I had taken it out of this dysfunctional family and told everyone all the dirty secrets, and all of a sudden I didn't change my tune. I was saying the same thing I had always said, but all of a sudden I was singled out, and they thought I was a traitor and everything else. It was a very interesting dynamic that was happening. And so they, as happens whenever someone goes public, they try to kill the messenger, say that I was lying, that I doctored the video, that I scared the monkeys, that I took it out of context, which I think is a really funny comment. It's like, in what context is an animal tearing at its own limbs and doing serious damage? What context is that okay? But they made all these claims, and thankfully we got some good support. Dr. Jane Goodall was able to view the videos, and as you probably all know, she's a world-renowned primatologist who's done really amazing research on wild chimpanzees in Gombe, Africa. And she was able to back me up and say, no, you cannot create this kind of stress by scaring monkeys. This was created. And it's actually what she's been seeing in these labs for the last 20 years. She was very disappointed to see that things have not really changed very much, and the same types of things were happening. And so if you were here earlier, you saw the PSA she did with us. She's done some extensive interviews, and she's been a huge boost to our campaign, and we're trying to get that PSA aired as much as possible. But it's on every level, this research is just simply not valid, and it's not working. I mean, you've got mistakes happening because the people doing the research are not vested in the research. They really don't even know what's in the needle they're injecting the monkey with. I I was never trained properly. I was giving injections. I didn't know the difference between a subcutaneous under the skin shot and an IM intramuscular shot, which is into the muscle. And so, I don't even know, weeks into me, doing the science, someone observed me doing it wrong and said, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I don't know, no one ever told me to do it differently." I was actually told by one of my weekend supervisors, and this is actually someone that I really grew to respect a lot, who had some sensitivity to the monkeys. He said, "Matt, if you want to get trained around here, you're going to have to do it yourself." And it wasn't far from the truth. I mean, I was trained to draw blood from a monkey from someone who had learned the procedure 2 weeks before and had probably only done it a couple of times. And that is just how these places operate. It's, like I said, assembly line style research. And so you've got, the fact that mistakes are happening. You have this whole other level of stress that these animals are under that are confounding the research. And then you've got the fact that you're dealing with a species that's not a human being. And that's probably, that's at the core of Dr. Greek's argument, is that you cannot extrapolate information from a mouse or a monkey and have it have any relevance to a human being. And the title of his latest book is What Will We Do If We Don't Experiment on Animals? And if this same book were written about human nutrition, the title would be, What Would We Do, How Would We Get Nutrition If We Didn't Eat Rocks? Because it's kind of a wrong analogy, and Dr. Greek is the first one to admit it. Everyone's always talking about the alternatives to animal research. Well, there is no alternative to animal research, because the model of using an animal to study human disease is false to begin with. And so it's leading science in the wrong direction and dead ends. It has a lot more to do with liabilities for drug companies. When they try to put a drug to market, it's actually cheaper for them to use an animal model. They have all these animals to choose from, so it's quite easy to find the animal that's going to test safe on that drug. They still don't know what it's going to do to a human being. And so when that drug passes the animal tests and then goes on to kill people, it's pretty easy to convince the jury in the court proceeding that we did all these animal studies and they proved to be safe, and so this is how they insulate themselves from lawsuits. It makes it easier for pharmaceutical companies to push drugs onto the market that are actually harming people. Primate is an excellent example of that. Recently, the hormone therapies that have been given to millions of women who are going through menopause, these hormone therapies were supposed to design to protect them from heart attacks, and now they're finding out that it's giving women heart attacks, exactly the opposite of what it was designed not to do. And this was based on monkey data that was not valid. And if Ray were here, he would just give you example after example after example. And I really don't want you to take my word for it, because if you're an animal rights activist, I think one of the things that we can do to help solve this problem is to educate ourselves, and we need to be informed. And I would encourage you to go to his website, curedisease.com, or check out some of his books and learn for yourselves the scientific argument, so you can be able to make some of the basic arguments about the science. Because no matter how much we talk about the ethics and these horrible, ridiculous studies, it always leads people to the question of, well, what about cancer? What about AIDS? The things that there's a huge fear of death, and that is how these researchers manipulate the media and manipulate people into buying into this animal research. And it's simply not working. And, historically it may have had a place when we were looking at how blood pumps through a human heart. You can look at a horse's heart or a dog's heart, and you can find those similarities. But now that we're looking at disease on a molecular or cellular level, little tiny differences make are hugely different in terms of the way drugs react in a living organism from a person to a mouse. And That's why you don't give your cat aspirin, but aspirin has been a huge breakthrough to relieve headaches in people, but it could kill your cat. And there's example after example about how animal research is not working. And how long is my part going, till 2:30?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I want to talk a little bit about some individuals that I met along the way, because for me this has become very personal. And these monkeys are individuals, just as individual as any dog or cat that you know, or any animal you've ever been close to. These monkeys have their own individual personalities and are as unique as we are to each other. And it's just mind-blowing how we can continue to treat them the way that we do. There was one monkey, and all the monkeys in these labs have numbers. They're basically given numbers, and they discourage us from naming them, because of course, names, you start to become more connected to the animals. They discourage you having any emotional connection at all. But we would name some of them, some of the technicians who cared. And there was this monkey, her number was 20600, and me and another technician called her Joplin. And Joplin was a Chinese origin rhesus macaque shipped over from Beijing, China, with a group of 100 other monkeys from the same place. And this is happening, it's very common now. They can't breed monkeys fast enough to keep up with the demand in research, so they're shipping monkeys overseas. Everyone that worked with these animals was very suspicious that these monkeys were wild caught, although the administrators were quick to deny it. A laboratory monkey tends to get overweight. They get no exercise, so they're sitting in a cage, they get overweight. They become very pale because they never feel any sunshine, they never get to breathe fresh air. But these monkeys came in, they were sun-tanned faces, they were very lean and muscled, they were very wild looking, and they were very naive to the cage. I mean, all the monkeys were fearful, but these monkeys were petrified, and they would either just stay frozen in the corner of the cage and shake, or they would just jump back and forth as quickly as they could, trying desperately to escape their little tiny cell whenever a person would enter the room. But Joplin was something else. She was so defiant, and in monkey language, to give direct eye contact is a threat. I mean, to us, it's kind of an affirming thing. With monkeys, they don't look each other directly in the eye, they divert their eyes. It's just the way that they interact. But for some reason, Joplin had no fear of me, and she would just stare me down and just stand in the front of her cage and just rattle the bars. And she hated me with good reason. I mean, I was her predator, and the people that she encountered were doing horrible things to her. But I really took a liking to her because I loved her fierce defiance, and I would give her treats, and she would have this expression on her face like, you know, I'll enjoy these treats, but I still hate your guts. And Joplin was eventually assigned to a protocol, like they all are, and she was put on a hormone study where they started doing injections and blood draws from her, and she started showing behaviors like they all were. She started pulling out her hair, and then she started biting herself at her ankles around the injection sites. And one time it was observed her having a grand mal seizure right after I can't remember if she was returned to the cage after a blood draw, an injection, or some kind of manipulation. She just had a full-on seizure in the bottom of her cage. And so we pleaded with the veterinarians to take her off the protocol. You know, we thought that was a good enough reason. She was likely to have some kind of neurological problem. Well, of course, they wouldn't take her off the protocol. Really, the veterinarians in these laboratories have very little power to do anything to protect the animals. It's really the interest of the researchers that are protected. And if the researcher says no, that's it. If the researcher wants to violate a law, like put a monkey in a cage that's too small, or not allow them enrichment, which is mandated by law. All they have to do is write an exemption and basically put it in the file, put it in their history, and they can do whatever they want. So painkillers don't have to be given if the researcher wants to say that it's going to interfere with their research. And Joplin, thankfully, was killed after, I don't know, she probably lived at the center for more than a year. I found out after I left through a friend who still worked there that she was finally killed, and it may sound weird that I am happy that she died, but really, for these animals in these labs, death is the only thing they have to look forward to. And it really is a situation that is far worse than death, I believe. And so, to know that she's no longer suffering is really important to me. But I think that what I hold on to with knowing Joplin, I feel very privileged to have known her, and I feel like that is the kind of defiance, that anger that she showed is the same anger that we need to have in terms of fighting against these labs. I mean, every night we get to go home, and we have stress in our lives, and we have problems, and it's not always easy to be a human on this planet. There's lots of horrible things that are happening to people, but these monkeys have nothing. They have no hope. I think she finally did give up hope after a while, at least according to my friend. She went into a depression and finally gave up hope. But her strength and her defiance is something that I try to remember in my fight and struggle against vivisection. And I think we all need to realize that this is a long-term fight. It's not something that's going to go away overnight. And I see a lot of, and all of you that have probably worked in animal rights have seen a lot of turnover and a lot of people come and go. And you see the problems, and they're so hard to deal with and hard to look at. And when they seem to be not changing, it's easy just to give up. But I do have hope, and I do think that this is going to end. And even though Jeremy is totally correct in saying that the primate labs are expanding, they are. The information and education about the nature of this research, the invalidity of it, the inhumanity of it, is also expanding. And I think we all have an obligation to educate ourselves about the issue and then to educate others. And do whatever you can. I mean, no, we're not all going to become full-time activists, but we certainly can all look at our own buying habits and look at what we've got in our own cupboards and medicine cabinets and closets, and make sure that we're not buying products that are tested on animals. That's one way that we can contribute. And also just be a voice for the animals, speaking up for them, talking, sharing this information with others, working in any way that we can to make this more public. Because the one thing that these researchers don't want us to do is to talk about this and educate people. They want to keep people in the dark. It's the status quo right now that animal research works, and so any discussion about it is clearly going to work against them and work in the animals' favor. So we need to make their voices heard. And I guess I want to save some time for questions if anyone has anything they want to talk about or questions.
I was wondering about your experience there. How long were you there for?
2 years.
2 years. Wow. And I understand that one of the reasons why the animal research goes on and the reason why the so-called scientists carry it out is because they get a lot of grant and research money to do that. And then you made some points, which I agree with, that it's unnecessary and it's not really doing anything for the human species. Why don't the people who give the grants and the research, why don't they ever wise up and stop getting grants?
Because the whole community is so insular. That's a good question. I mean, it seems like so obvious that they should just take a good hard look at it, and if it's public money, which it is, it's our tax dollars funding this stuff, someone should take an interest in making sure that our money is being well spent, even if you could care less about the ethics. But the situation is the people that are approving the grants are either current or former animal researchers. And so this is the whole, it's the fox watching the hen house sort of situation, not only in the accreditation and the oversight, but also in the grant process. And so you've got the people that sit on the animal care committees are researchers. The people that approve the protocols and offer the grants are also animal researchers, and it's kind of just like, it's been entrenched in the whole field of research for so long that it's just believed to have value. And so, in my opinion, they are getting published, and the number of publications keeps growing and growing, but these publications are collecting dust on medical shelves, and the clinicians are not really looking at this data because a lot of this is happening in parallel to human research, and it's totally unnecessary. It's like, oftentimes, a discovery, more often than not, a discovery happens in a petri dish or on a cell tissue, and then they try to reproduce it in animals. It's not the reverse. You would think they want you to believe that, we can't test on humans, so we first have to test on animals. Well, it's not even the case. They're discovering things through all these other modalities that they always have discovered, like cancer research. 99% of that is happening in vitro. It's happening, they take cancer cells and they apply agents and they find out what makes the cancer stop growing, what suppresses it. And it's only the second stage where the animal testing even happens before it goes on to clinical trials. But a lot of researchers themselves are arguing that they're trying to speed up the process because people are dying of cancer. There are terminal patients that would probably be willing to try experimental drugs. I mean, what do they have to lose? And it could help them, or if it doesn't help them, it could help someone down the line. And so the whole system needs to be totally reworked, but it's very difficult to make changes.
Can you comment a little bit on what you saw as far as the atmosphere of fear against animal rights activists in the Primate Center?
Yeah. The question is, from the inside, what is the fear of the research industry to animal rights activists? And one seminar we had, and I can't remember the person's name, they invited someone to speak, and it was an all-campus event, and everyone came, and someone got up in front of us and told us about the Great Ape Project. And it was really interesting to hear because the researchers were educated that it wasn't a question of if someday chimpanzees were going to be given rights. It was clearly a question of when. And I think that stunned a lot of the researchers because they're so used to, they're in such an insulated community where they're all patting each other on the back and approving each other's research and feeling good about themselves. That was a shock to them, that someone from their own community got up and said, someday a chimpanzee will be put on the stand, so to speak, and through sign language. This was the illustration they used. Some signing chimp was going to talk about how they felt about being experimented on or being kept in a cage. And it was also really interesting because inside the lab, we could, like I said, we could diss other researchers, talk about this ridiculous study where they're, flying airplanes over monkeys' heads to scare them, or there was this same researcher, Judy Cameron, was trying to use monkeys as a model for human divorce. Monkeys don't have nuclear families. The male leaving the family is normal in a monkey troop, as opposed to a nuclear family that has a mom and a dad. They're matrilinear. The female bloodlines stay together and the males leave the troop. But anyway, it was okay to joke about that. But as soon as the protesters were outside, everyone would rally together and, all those people are idiots and they don't know what they're talking about. It was very defensive. I think they were very defensive, and out of that defensiveness was a real reluctance to ever talk about ethics. If you even, discussed ethics, I think that you were questioned, like maybe you're an animal rights activist in disguise. I mean, it was just, in fact, we had a protest one time and one of my coworkers, just wanted to, he was new and he wanted to go talk to the protesters. He's like, I just want to hear what they have to say. I mean, I think we should have a discussion about this. And he went out during his break on his own time and talked to the protesters. And when he got back, he was told in no uncertain terms that was totally unacceptable. He was not ever to talk to protesters. And later that day or that week, I can't remember exactly, he had an earful from the protesters, and what the conclusion he came to it was, Matt, I really think they're right. And, he was a sensitive person. He eventually quit. And a lot of people quit these jobs out of frustration. It's a revolving door. We have 100% turnover. People come and go all the time, but it's pretty rare that someone actually speaks out about it. And that's what's so frustrating, is that, it's very difficult to get someone to actually take a stand and go public. But,
why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think it might have something to do with the way that animal rights are perceived right now. I think that we're a very young movement, and we're still maybe at the tail end of the ridicule phase, where it hasn't really quite come to the questioning phase, where it's really considered a legitimate question. And it's, someone coming out of the lab, I don't know, they don't want to get lumped into that category. They certainly don't want to be perceived as an animal rights activist, because those guys are wackos. But even though they share the same feelings and beliefs as those animal rights wackos, it's just that perception of what that means. And I don't know, I talked to many technicians. I talked to all of the technicians I worked with who would talk to me. Many of them said, Matt, I still love you and I believe in what you're doing, but I just, I can't support you publicly. And a couple of them have come very close to speaking out publicly, and just for one reason or another, family have talked them out of it. It's just a whole variety of things. I guess since I have a little bit more time and I could talk about this all day, I think I'll share another quick story. Oh, do you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, well, after you share your story.
Okay, well,
I can wait.
I want your question first, and then I'll tell you my story.
It's kind of a response.
Okay.
Why are we perceived as wackos or not taken seriously? I got some answers for that, but I want to hear from you.
Well, I think that, I don't know. I think that, we don't have to look back too far to remember when environmentalists were considered wackos too. And I think it's just kind of like, when you come from a minority position that is so far from the status quo, it's kind of just the way, I don't know if it's human nature or the way our culture has evolved, that you have to be, the message has to be repeated over and over and over again until someone's really going to listen to you, which to me gives me hope, because it makes me feel like, I really feel like we're moving into that stage of being the questioning stage. I mean, Dr. Greek has been doing a lot of public speaking over in England, and he's being taken very seriously over there, and they're a bit ahead of us in terms of the anti-vivisection movement, and I think that's a sign of what's on the horizon in the US. I just think it's just a matter of time. We just have to just keep, there was a point when everyone, it was the general consensus that the earth was flat, and if you were to argue the earth was round, you could get locked up, and yet the earth is round. So I don't know. That's the best argument. Would you have a thought on that?
Yeah. I think, of course, we are advocating for a radical change in dominant culture to be more compassionate towards animals or eco considerations. But also, I think within the movement, there are entities, groups, and ideologies and mantras that make use of silliness to get media. And it's a two-edged sword. Yeah, you will get media. You are using I'll go out on a limb and I'll say PETA, who's one of the groups that is really making us look silly and not very serious. We're not taken serious because of the wacky stuff that we are perceived to do.
Yeah. And I worked for PETA, and some of that stuff frustrated me when I worked there, because I know their research and investigation department is top notch, and they were very, very careful about never never being dishonest about anything. Nothing is exaggerated. The truth is bad enough. When it comes to animal cruelty, you don't need to exaggerate it. It's horrible. And but then at the same time, I can understand some of their philosophy because I know how it is. Like, say PETA does an undercover investigation at a turkey farm and documents on video someone just brutalizing these poor animals, and they hold a press conference and they have all this bulletproof evidence and no one shows up. But in the same town, someone shows up in a skimpy turkey costume, all of a sudden every station is there to cover it. And I think it's like, you know, the animal rights movement gets criticized for doing that, but I think it's like, it's only after we've tried other methods that they've amped up to like, okay, what is going to get attention? And so now they're just, you know, I'm not saying that I totally buy into it, but I can kind of understand the mentality of, well, we need to get the message out. If we can attach the message to something else and look silly, so what? Maybe it'll work. And I mean, I know there's lots of different feelings about that.
So it comes at a cost that we're not a serious movement.
Yeah.
And not to mention that we do things at the expense of other movements, of viewing movements, and that's a divide and conquer dynamic.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that, I personally don't believe in single issue politics. I think that, you know, I was an environmentalist before I was an animal rights activist, and I think that there's no line between the two. For me, they completely overlap. And human rights, I think that, you know, we all have a common oppressor, you know, which is greed, and we need to work together. We're all such small, fragmented. Our common enemies want us to be fragmented, and I think we need to work harder on bridging those gaps and working with the labor movement and working with the environmentalists and all these other types of activism to band together. So I kind of share your feeling. I think that animal research should be shut down purely for the ethics, even if it did benefit humanity. I think that, you know, we have we certainly have a obligation to first do no harm. I mean, that's the Hippocratic oath of doctors, you know, to first do no harm. Well, animal research flies in the face of that, and I think that probably the scientific argument could stand alone too. I think that we just need to make all the arguments that we possibly can and show how ridiculous it is on many different levels and how cruel it is. And who knows? I think our movement is too young to really be able to predict what's going to stop vivisection. On a day-to-day basis of these people being at work, it is just a job, and it's what they do for a living. You know, all the lectures I went to, I rarely ever do you even hear about them talk about the connection to human health. In basic research, they're just doing research that's hopefully they assume someday someone might look at it, but they're basically just tinkering, you know, and scientific tinkering. Yeah, I mean, they've used the old argument, you know, choosing between a mouse and a child. Well, you know, for almost everyone that is an obvious choice, but it's not really the real choice. You know, we're really choosing between valuable research that's going to benefit people and research that's wasting money. And that's the message that we definitely need to get out. That's a great point. I mean, one of the biggest medical breakthroughs that we ever had was just washing hands and you know, basic plumbing and sanitation. And there's so many, it's ridiculous that we're dumping so much money into research that's, if it benefits anyone, it's going to benefit a very small percentage of people, when this is public money, when we have cures today for things that people are suffering from and they can't afford the medication. And it's all about the cost of drugs. And what never really gets discussed is the fact that most of the diseases that we have are totally preventable with diet. I mean, if we put money into nutrition education and started working towards, it's this weird cycle. It's like we abuse all these animals to eat them, and then these animals that we're eating are causing all this disease in us, so we abuse all these other animals supposedly to get cures for the diseases that we're creating that are totally unnecessary. You know, we're dying of heart attacks. There's no need for that. So yeah, prevention. But see, doctors and pharmaceutical companies don't make money off of healthy people. They make money off of sick people. So it's very difficult to get money funding for, you know, nutrition education or prevention. Yeah, it's very common. I sat on IACUC for a while at the Oregon Primate Center. I was the alternate. There was one animal technician that was always on the committee, so I was the alternate, and I got to sit in on a couple of meetings, and it's very much a rubber stamp committee. That when protocols come to the IACUC, that represents money to the university, and most of the people on that committee, all of the people have a vested interest. Most of them are staff that work for the university, but some of them, they have like one community member, but it's handpicked, someone who, you know, very closely associated. And when they're reviewing that protocol, like Jeremy said, yeah, they're almost always approved unanimously. Sometimes, yeah, they go back for revision for some little nuance to change the helicopter to a glider or whatever. But they're always approved because it represents money, and this is all about money. It's about bringing money and prestige to the university. The president of OHSU is trying very hard to move from number 28 to number 20 in NIH funding, and there's no ethical consideration at all. It's about bringing in as many grant dollars and trying to get patents on products and on drugs and techniques and whatnot. So yeah, it's the universities have a huge vested interest. A lot of the grant money, some of the grant money goes directly into the foundation to help build buildings and other allied expenses. So they have a huge interest in making that continue. And I'm going way over time. Is this bad? Okay. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for your attention.